This is Dr. Ben Weitz with the Rational Wellness Podcast, bringing you the cutting-edge information on health and nutrition from the latest scientific research and by interviewing the top experts in the field. Please subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast on iTunes and YouTube, and sign up for my free ebook on my website by going to drweitz.com. Let's get started on your road to better health. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Thank you so much for joining me again today. For those of you who enjoy listening to the Rational Wellness Podcast, please go to iTunes and give us a ratings and a review. That way more people can find out about the Rational Wellness Podcast. Our topic for today is predictive biomarkers with Dr. Russell Jaffe. Predictive biomarkers are things that can be measured objectively that will be the best predictors of our long-term health. These are typically measured through blood or urine or saliva tests. And from the hundreds of thousands of lab tests available, Dr. Jaffe has selected approximately 8 tests that he feels the evidence shows are the best predictors that will still be alive in 10 years. Dr. Russell Jaffe has an MD and a PhD from the Boston University School of Medicine. He's board certified in clinical pathology. He's worked at the National Institute of Health, has done research, and has published over 80 scientific papers, and was originally quite skeptical of functional medicine. He developed the first lymphocyte response assay for food sensitivities and continues to be the lab director of ELISA Act Biotechnologies, as well as the founder and chairman of a nutritional supplement company, Perque Integrative Health. Dr. Jaffe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, Dr. Jaffe, you've worked at the National Institute of Health, and you were fully immersed in the conventional medical model of care, and somehow you've made your way over to the progressive side of things, to the functional medicine side of things. Can you tell our listeners what changed your thinking and how you've come over to this different way of understanding the body?
Well, thanks for asking. In the early 70s, I arrived as a public health service officer at the Clinical Center of the National Institutes of Health. That's my full-time job. But I heard that there was a man named Qing Wu, an acupuncturist who would needle people and get results that we couldn't get at NIH. And as a skeptic, I went, and then I did a 7-year apprenticeship with him, and then taught a program called Oriental Medical Strategies in Western Medical Practice, which was a part of the foundation of continuing medical education to license medical acupuncture in New York and California. Then I heard about Dr. Ramamurthy Mishra and the Yoga Society of New York and the textbook of yoga psychology, an MD PhD cross-trained in Benares, and I went to debunk him, and I had 5 years as his student. And then I met a Cambodian Buddhist monk named Bhante Dharmawara. I met him at his birthday on Sunday. On Tuesday, he moved in because he had decoded a non-invasive color healing system that the Buddha taught, that was practiced for 500 years, lost for 2,000 years, and he, from his study of the ancient texts, deduced what it was and brought it forth, and I'm one of his students. So I did come as a skeptic. My experience taught me that my skepticism came out of my ignorance, not out of wisdom. And that, yes, the analytic skill, whatever I have as a methodologist, as a clinician, as a diagnostician, as somebody who's made up, every year I was at NIH, we introduced what became a gold standard of laboratory testing because there was a lot of need, and at that time, a lot of support for the kind of work that I was doing. So I did indeed come as a skeptic. I did apprenticeships that taught me to respect wisdom traditions, observational science, as well as double-blind placebo-controlled studies. And our super multi, the Perque Lifeguard Tabsule, an all-active novel delivery system it's a super B complex with a super mineral complex and 40 active ingredients, not 20, in meaningful amounts, because we don't have any binders, fillers, excipients, flowing agents, and schmutzy stuff, or need it, because as a biochemist and a physical chemist, I know how nature brings foods together, and there's no glue involved, and we do the same thing. with all of the Perque products. And we did this double-blind placebo-controlled trial at the Military Medical School in Bethesda, Maryland, because someone was going to say to me, did you do a double-blind study? And I was going to say to them, yes. And it came out and was published by my colleague, Dr. Patricia Doister. And it was done at the Military Medical School, which means it was done properly with proper controls. So yes, I'm an advocate for these predictive biomarkers that cover lifestyle, they cover choice, habits of daily living. And most of us don't have perfect habits as reflected in the value, the test value, being above the ideal. Now, I want to make a very clear point that labs produce ranges and you compare results to ranges, making people into statistics. Now, that's fine for population studies. It tells you almost nothing and may actually be confusing with regard to the healthy value for that test. So my suggestion is, instead of even looking at the range, just fold it under so you don't have to look at it. Look at the value of these 8 biomarker tests. And yes, we did a funnel analysis starting with over 100,000 tests. And we wanted to cover all of epigenetics, all of lifestyle, all of the things that your habits control, which is 92% of your lifetime health. And each of these 8 tests is an all-cause morbidity mortality marker. And when you put them together, you cover the 92% of lifetime quality of life and health that is determined by epigenetics. Now, the simplest I can explain epigenetics is it's not genetic. It's not the DNA. It's not the RNA. It's the products. It's the functional quality of your cells. It's the acid-alkaline balance. It's whether the essential, and by essential, we mean the nutrients you must take in because your body can't make them. And yes, the 21st century is more intoxicating and intoxicated over 5 different categories. So therefore, you have to increase the antitoxic nutrients that get consumed and chewed up and spit out by the toxins of everyday, the stresses of everyday living. Technically, it's called the allostatic and homeostatic load, for those of you who are into Greek and Latin, but that means the internal and external total toxic burden, which requires more nutrients than it used to because the 21st century is, spoiler alert, more toxic than the 20th. And the 20th was more toxic than the 19th.
Cool. So can you explain which predictive biomarkers you think are most important? And I just wanted to point out for the listeners who are still a little confused about epigenetics, your genes are the things that are laid it down in your DNA, and the epigenetics are basically has to do with how you lead your life and whether or not those genes get expressed, whether or not they get turned off or turned on.
Right. That's right. The environment, your attitude, your nutritional status, your toxic load all modulate the expression of your genetic code.
Right.
And that's what epigenetics is. And it turns out it's much more important than even we thought a few decades ago. In fact, it's probably where the opportunity to feel and function better, because not only are we looking at the 10-year horizon and your probability of living 10 or more years, but we're also talking about the functional age at which you operate and perform. And as an example, I can tell you that by the measures that we do, and I get to do a lot of measurements on myself, I am functioning mostly as a 35 to 40-year-old, which means half my biological age. And I get restorative sleep. I can preach the value of restorative sleep. I eat moderately. I'm a reformed, fluffy person. I used to weigh 65 pounds more. And I think it was Mark Hyman who taught me this. If you look at yourself in a full-length mirror and you wiggle your tummy and it jiggles, your fat pads are too fat. So it was not a simple resolution one day and resolve the next day. It took me time to lose the weight. I don't plan to find it again, but I can tell you that after I got down to the weight I choose, which is more or less what you see, it took another year before the leptin hormone, the hormone that causes raging appetite, to come back to normal. And so because of having had that humbling experience, I can advocate for it I can explain to people what happened to me as an example and how much better I feel and function and how much more able I am to get at least 8,000 steps in a day as my current goal. Because when I wake up in the morning, first I stretch in bed, but then I get up and I stretch in the shower, and then I'm ready for the day.
Hey, before we get into the specific biomarkers,
Sure.
have you heard of the telomere length test? This is a test that people have come up with to measure the end of the chromosome. And this one test is designed to be a predictor of long-term health. What do you think about that test? And
I can tell you that my telomeres were shorter when I was fluffy. My telomeres have gotten much longer, which is better, now that I'm more moderate in my habits. So yes, I think the telomere test, in general, I do not recommend genetic tests. I can explain why Eric Linder and I agree. He's a geneticist, I'm an epigeneticist. However, I do think that telomere length is validated on every ethnic group, on every socioeconomic group. That's what you need. You need a test that's been around long enough that people who have skepticism about like split sample precision, measuring telomeres is not easy. It has a variance. It has to be done right. So if someone is selling you a telomere test on the street corner, be skeptical. But it is the one test, because I want to get onto the 8 that cover epigenetics.
I know.
It is the one test that I think you're absolutely right. Telomere length correlates with your survivability. And it's not that expensive, won't break the bank. But if it's okay, let me list the 8 predictive biomarkers.
Let's do that.
And then we'll come back and talk about what the best outcome value is, what is the goal value, and what does it mean in terms of 10-year survival, but also short-term quality of life.
Sure, sounds good.
The first is a very familiar test, hemoglobin A1c. The second is a pretty familiar test, high sensitivity C-reactive protein, HSCRP. The third test, familiar, but you have to follow the rules of how to do it correctly. It is a plasma homocysteine. That's not a political statement, that's an amino acid. And it's the ratio of methionine to homocysteine that predicts cardiovascular events and other potential catastrophes. The fourth test is the lymphocyte response assay. This is the cell culture to measure T and B cell function. Not the physical chemistry of an antibody, because you can't tell if it's good or bad, but letting white cells, called lymphocytes, react ex vivo, just as they do in the body, to tell us where you're tolerant, foods, chemicals, environmental substances, and where you're intolerant, where you've broken tolerance, where you have the body attacking itself, inducing repair deficit called inflammation, inducing self-attack called autoimmunity. The fifth test is a self-test. This is a urine test. After 6 hours of rest, and you can go to the bathroom, you just can't go to the kitchen or the gym, but after 6 hours of rest, the fluid in the bladder has equilibrated with the lining cells. And it's the one time of day when you get a meaningful pH that correlates with your magnesium at the cellular level. We'll come back to that. So it's your first morning urine pH, and we'll come back when I go through what the goal values are. That's the fifth. The sixth is a vitamin D level. The country is low in vitamin D. That's, quote, statistically normal, but it increases your risk of everything from pain to cancer. So we recommend having a healthier vitamin D level. And how much vitamin D should you take? Well, enough to get into the healthier range, which I'm going to give in just a minute after we get through the 8. Okay, so number 7 is the omega-3 index. This is Bill Harris's test looking at the omega-3 to 6 ratio. And the last is an unfamiliar one to most people, but it's the test of DNA oxidative damage, which, by the way, correlates with telomeres. And it's called 8-oxoguanine. It's a urine spot test. And it rounds out, it adds the only other piece that wasn't covering everything in your lifestyle. So now let's go back through the 8, and I'm going to give you the best outcome goal value and how we know that that's true. So hemoglobin A1c should be less than 5%. I can tell you that mine was getting up into the high 5s, and that means pre-diabetic, that means fluffy, etc. It means insulin resistance, it means metabolic syndrome. And now I can tell you the last 2 tests I have my test done about every 6 months, was 4.5%. And what did I do? Well, I ate the foods that I could digest, assimilate, and eliminate. And I stopped adding sugar. I'm sweet enough as I am, and so are you. We don't need to add sugar in our diet. And just to kind of nail that point, the average American today eats as much sugar in a week as our great-grandparents ate in a year. That is a metabolic formula for problems. So hemoglobin A1c less than 5%, and every one of these tests, as I said, have been studied on every ethnic group, every socioeconomic group, every geographic area, and they are all-cause morbidity mortality tests. That's a very high bar standard.
Now, why did you pick hemoglobin A1c versus fasting glucose or postprandial glucose or fasting insulin?
Right. Now, when we did our studies, and we have successful published studies in type 1 diabetes and type 2, starting from best standard of care, our approach, this comprehensive integrative approach, lowered their hemoglobin A1c by 1%, which adds 20 quality years to life, and we measured the glucose and insulin. We measured the HOMA, the ratio. We measured the kinds of things you're asking about. As you know, I was just at the Integrative Health Symposium in New York and was talking about this subject. And the American Diabetes Association was the other half of the hotel conference area. And they now agree that we know about white coat hypertension, but we need to remember about white coat hyperglycemia, because just the stress of seeing a needle or going to a doctor causes an adrenaline release in most people, enough people that this is a known phenomenon. And so it turns out the fasting blood sugar overstates the issue of concern and is not predictive. It's not anywhere near as predictive as a hemoglobin A1c, because hemoglobin A1c, this is Paul Gallup's work from the 1960s. This has to do with how much extra sugar gets stuck onto proteins, including hemoglobin. And if you have healthy red cells that live 3 to 4 months, then, and you're a very calm person who meditates every day and you're well hydrated and so forth, well, then you can measure glucose or insulin or the ratio. But if you want the most predictive test, the high value test, the one that is an all-cause morbidity with very few quote, pre and post analytic complications, it's hemoglobin A1c, absolutely. Now the second test, same a parallel discussion. Paul Ridker and Nader Rafai noticed that C-reactive protein was an index of repair need or inflammation. And they noticed that at the low end was very important information that the standard CRP was missing because it wasn't very sensitive. In fact, it was very variable at the low end. So we want HS-CRP, high sensitivity C-reactive protein. And the goal value is less than 0.5. And above that, you have repair deficit known as inflammation. And I've seen numbers way above that, indicating substantial and continuing pervasive repair deficit, where the quality of life goes down. And as my grandmother used to say, the rents are going up and the ceilings are coming down. Now, you want to take in enough polyphenolics and enough ascorbate based on your C-cleanse and enough of the essential B complex and other nutrients, full B complex, super B complex, enough to keep your urine sunshine yellow. Most people have glass clear urine, indicating a deficit of B vitamins. So HSCRP.
Well, that's kind of interesting, because everybody talks about, oh, you have expensive urine, as though that's a bad thing. And so what you're suggesting is if you have clear urine, that's a problem.
And I got to say that to Abe White, the man who is quoted as saying, taking supplements makes expensive urine. And I said, Abe, does that mean that eating food makes expensive poop? And he was a nice guy. He liked to be quotable. And he was. Anyway, yes, the body gives us many opportunities to make simple self-assessments or measurements, test measurements, compare them to the best outcome or known goal value, that is what healthy people have, because that optimizes your short and long-term survival. It's only about quality of life and survival, and I hope that's of interest to everyone who's listening.
And just because you're urinating out vitamin C doesn't mean that on its way through your body, it's not quenching free radicals and then taking those out of your body. So
All correct. All correct. Let me
Good
just
thing.
add one little footnote. You need to protect the kidney, the bladder, and that whole genitourinary system by bathing it in ascorbate. So you need ascorbate in the urine. And some other time I'll talk to you about how I came as a skeptic to ascorbate and how I met Linus Pauling and why I'm now a big advocate for the C-cleanse, the next generation after bowel tolerance, Bob Cathcart's approach. So you very quickly ramp up and then flush out waste, water, and toxins that get pumped by the rectum, because remember, that's kind of like the kidney embryologically, pumped by the rectum when you do the C-cleanse. And you might want to measure your transit time to see from consumption to elimination. It should be 12 to 18 hours. You can do it with charcoal capsules. Yes, you can do it with beets. You know, when we have roast beets for dinner, and that's the main course, I often see red in the commode in the morning. But I'll tell you, after all these years, the first time I see red in the commode, my first thought is, oh, I had beets last night. No. So do it with charcoal. And we have this written up online. People can download it from Perque, Perque.com. You can also get information about these tests from betterlabtestsnow.com, betterlabtestsnow.com. That's all one, it's a website that has information and will go into much more but simple detail about why this can save your life or the lives of people you love. Okay. So gotten through most of them in terms of what their goal value is. With regard to the LRA test, the goal is to be tolerant. The goal is to have no delayed hypersensitivities, to have your innate immune system repairing you and defending you sufficiently that you don't need to call in the reserve troops. So that's the LRA test. Now, with regard to the first morning urine pH, so that we can measure the risk of magnesium deficit in the cells, which everyone agrees is important, but most physicians and scientists correctly for years have said, we don't have a simple way of measuring that. We don't have an inexpensive way of measuring that. You can't do arterial or venous pHs on everybody all the time. It's just too cumbersome and too expensive. And I think that's probably true. But it turns out Mother Nature almost always gives you a window of opportunity into some aspect. And in this case, it's your magnesium, which is the alkaline element and mineral, like potassium, that is mostly inside the cell. And if you've ever heard of ATP, the work molecule of the cell, you need one molecule of magnesium for every ATP molecule. Otherwise, the ATP just lays there. And the cell shifts from elective protective mode, which is what you want because it can repair you and defend you. It shifts from elective protective to survival mode. It just hunkers down in its slightly acidotic state. Protein synthesis is not very efficient. The cell energetically is depleted. The mitochondria cannot push more energy in because of the so-called proton gradient. And that is complicated. They gave Mitchell the Nobel Prize for figuring out that you need magnesium so that the cytoplasm, the juice of the cell, can accept the acid proton along with the ATP and then kick that acid proton out with the help of magnesium. When you lack magnesium and or potassium, then the cell becomes more acidic, and small changes in pH have dramatic effects on the vitality, the functionality of the cell. So morning urine pH, 6.5 to 7.5 is the healthy range. Below that means acidosis, metabolic acidosis, cellular acidosis. It means functionally you need to increase magnesium. And we'll come back, if it's okay, to talk about what are the first line comprehensive care approaches if you're above the goal value for any of these tests. But we're at the pH. And then the next one is vitamin D. And the goal value is 50 to 80. Now, the Vitamin D Council has a slightly different range, but almost the same. My colleague and other experts in vitamin D research, including my colleague Susan Brown, she and I have written articles about building new bone by having a healthy vitamin D level. 50 to 80 is the range. And that gives you some latitude. If you're a little above that or a little below that, it's probably okay. But 50 to 80 is the goal range for 25-hydroxy-D. That's clearly the right analyte. That's what you measure.
Whereas most labs would say 30 or 32 is put you in a normal range. We're looking for the optimal range, not the normal range.
Yes, sir. And one of the things I did when I was at the clinical center is I changed all the reports because we were using the term normal range, and I knew that was a mathematical term having to do with statistics, and doctors thought it had to do with normality, you know, like common parlance, normal. So I changed the reports, and they all said usual range, because that's accurate. All over NIH, doctors called up and said, we don't want the usual range, we want the normal range. And so I had phone banks of people who just explained to the doctor, it's the same thing, doctor. We want you to know that this is a statistical range. It has nothing to do with function. It has nothing to do with the healthy value. So you're right. America, probably the upper range for most labs is 30. Some
Boy, you were causing trouble back then, Doc.
Yes, yes, yes. And again, it was out of a combination of skepticism, but also I went to people who knew a lot more than I did about these issues, and I was just the messenger of the message. But if you give me a message, my mother said, stand on the street corner and sing. You know, get people to pay attention. And fortunately, when you're on the permanent senior staff of NIH, you can get people to pay attention. So very important point. You want the healthy value, not the quote normal statistical range. In fact, there was an article not too long ago in the New York Times that said, because it's normal to have a low vitamin D, you shouldn't even measure vitamin D, and it's normal to have a low vitamin D. And I did write a response, and if anyone wants, you can see online why that makes you into a statistic and increases your risk of pain. It increases your risk of cancer. It turns out that vitamin D is really a neurohormone. We call it a vitamin, but it's really a neurohormone. And it has two arms. And what it does is one arm touches a cell over here, the other arm touches a cell over here, and vitamin D says to them, we have enough of you. You know, I can reach across and touch. My two arms are now each touching a different cell. We have enough cells, stop dividing. That's a neurohormone function. That's a very important function. That's an anti-cancer function. That's a pain relieving function. So vitamin D, very important, 50 to 80 is the goal value range. Then omega-3 index. Bill Harris was sitting with my colleague, Patty Doister, the one who helped do that double-blind study of the Perque Lifeguard capsule. And he was complaining to her that there are too few people taking enough omega-3 to be in the healthy range, which is more than 8%. And Patty, without missing a beat, just pointed at me. He took a lancet out, took a little spot of blood, analyzed it in his lab, and sent back that mine was 13%. And I said, well, is that better than 8? You know, sometimes you plateau at a certain value. He said, oh, no. 13 is definitely better than 8. I said, well, next time someone is higher than 13, let me know. And it turns out someone else, actually a relatively young person with attention deficit disorder and some special needs, had a mom that was just getting an awful lot of omega-3 in. And when you asked her, she said, because it helps him think, sleep, and be kind. And I thought that was a good reason to have it. Okay, so omega-3 index, more than 8%. And what does that mean? It means reducing or eliminating edible oils. As a hint, we cook with wine, broth, and a little juice from time to time, usually fresh made. And we don't use edible oils. I think edible oils is kind of a term to make you think that it's edible. But it turns out that seeds and nuts protect the oil that's inside with antioxidants and other protectors. And when you express the oil, air, oxygen, begins to make it rancid. And what commercial companies do is they mask the rancidity in edible oils, and we don't include those in our diet, not even EVO, not even extra virgin olive oil. Talk to anyone who really knows EVO or has been to Tuscany, as my family and I have, at the time when you harvest the olives and you bring them to the oleandro, and at night they crush the olives and make this dark green, cloudy, delicious olive oil. So what we see as EVO in the market is something that Bertolli and other commercial companies call EVO, but talk to any Italian who knows their oil and they'll tell you that extra virgin olive oil is a kind of a made-up situation. It's like a fraud waiting to be exposed. So edible oils, take a pass, but cook with wine, with juice, cook with broth, cook with what nature provided great chefs the opportunity to concentrate flavor and nutrition. So that's the value of more omega-3, less omega-6. And if you just reduce or eliminate edible oils, that's most of the omega-6. And if you increase your omega-3, taking, say, Perque EPA DHA guide, distilled under nitrogen because the fish are swimming in the ocean, and yes, there's lead and mercury and other schmutzy stuff in the raw oil. But if you take the middle fraction, the pharmaceutical grade EPA DHA, it's near pure EPA DHA. Now you have nature's original omega-3. It turns out the precursor, there is an upstream molecule that most people cannot convert into the active EPA DHA. And while your brain has a lot of DHA, I say, and I think most omega-3 researchers agree with me on this, you need DHA for brain and body, you need EPA for body and brain, and don't assume they interconvert. Don't assume that these very easily inhibited enzyme systems will be operating at peak capacity or efficiency. In fact, just take the distilled under nitrogen EPA DHA, micellized in a soft gel, because that gets the uptake, enhances the uptake, and it chaperones the delivery to the cells, who then use the EPA and DHA to build their membrane, to build their very fundamental structure. And about 1/3 of the white matter of your brain is DHA. And a lot of people who get forgetful and are diagnosed as having a neuropathy, to be polite, or forgetfulness episodes or senior moments, they're just deficient in DHA. And I'll bet they're also deficient in EPA. Okay, so that's the importance of the omega-3 index test. And then we have the last. This is the urine test, the 8-oxoguanine. That's 8-OXO-GUANINE. See, I really am a biochemist. 8-oxoguanine. It's the measure of oxidative damage in your DNA, in the nucleus of your cell, including the DNA in the mitochondria. And so it's a very important test. It's been validated. It may be unfamiliar, but it is just a non-invasive urine test. And since you were good enough to raise the question of telomeres, I'll mention again that a low 8-oxoguanine correlates with longer telomeres. I can tell you from both personal and professional experience. And so we recommend at this point the 8-oxoguanine. If a colleague wanted to do telomeres and omit 8-oxoguanine, I'm happy to consult with them and applaud. But the 8 that I've listed are what we publish as the ones that cover epigenetics. It turns out that while the telomere test is one that I would support and encourage people to do, it's just coming into its own. It's not yet clear that it really has the 10-year morbidity, mortality, all-cause kind of thing that the 8-oxoguanine is. And so now, if you want to, we can go back to the 8 and very briefly say, what are the headlines of what would you do if you were not at your goal value for hemoglobin A1c?
Yeah, great. Let's do that.
Okay, so I already gave you the headline, which is you're sweet enough as you are, cut out added sugar. Now that means cutting out almost all packaged and processed foods, but that is helpful because they look like food and they have a long shelf life. That's a hint. And I'm recommending that you eat whole foods, that you know everything that you're eating, you know every ingredient on the package if you buy anything with ingredients, and we do occasionally, but I want to see whole ingredients. I'm very skeptical, having worked with the food industry at their request, I am very skeptical about these crisped, chipped, and extruded foods. They look like foods, they have calories, but they usually have too much sodium, too little potassium, too much calcium, too little magnesium. I could go on and on about why whole foods are made for people. And here is, to me, the surprise and the pleasant surprise. Come to my kitchen. You will see lots of whole foods that are easy to make into really yummy things and fairly quickly. So this notion of, oh, fast foods are convenient. Well, fast foods feed diabetes and fluffiness and sedentary lifestyle. So I'm skeptical of fast food.
And with avoiding the sugar, I'm assuming that you want to stay away from high glycemic carbs in general, right?
That's correct. Now, big fan of complex carbs and fiber. You need prebiotic fiber 40 to 100 grams a day. You need probiotic organisms 40 to 100 billion a day. Easy to remember, 40 to 100 grams of fiber, that means chewing your food, and 40 to 100 billion probiotic organisms. But then there's a symbiotic, recycled glutamine, what we call Perque Endura Pack Guard, ENDURAPAK. It recycles the glutamine 10 times. It gives the energy to the lining cells of the intestine that use glutamine for energy. They need energy so fast They have to pull the amine off the glutamine, creating glutamate. With the help of PAC, you pick up the amine, transfer it back to the glutamate, so you never build up glutamate excitoneuratoxin, and now the cell can use the glutamine to extract the energy again. It's a recycle 10 times, so now 1.5 grams on rising and before bed, because you want amino acids taken on an empty stomach. 1.5 grams is equivalent to 15 grams of free glutamine, but now you keep the physiology, you don't use it pharmacologically with the potential collateral adverse effects. So very important, simple message that nature, nurture, and wholeness will bring you lifelong good health, especially if you eat what you can digest, assimilate, and eliminate without immune burden. And that would relate to the LRA test, where your goal is to have no reactions, no intolerances. And I'll give an example. A friend called me up and said that her friend, dear friend, had multiple sclerosis, was in a wheelchair. Multiple sclerosis is known as an autoimmune condition. She went through 4 6-month cycles, and at the end of 2 years, she sent me a photograph of herself rock climbing. Not only did her MS go into remission, but she was able to physically get back to climb, she wasn't going to climb Yosemite, but she was rock climbing and enjoying her life.
That's great.
Yes. And we see that all the time. We've got over 80,000 cases in our database. We did the science first before we came forward to talk the message, to carry the message. But at this point, we're very excited about the possibility of restoring tolerance in the immune system. And as a consequence, restoring digestive health, restoring the ability to repair on the inside. So your innate immune system activates and does what it's supposed to do, defends you and repairs you. And you can think of it this way. During the day on defense, at night, restorative sleep is the time when abnormal cells and things that are worn out need to get repaired. And if they don't get repaired, you get inflammation. And if you get enough inflammation, you can have autoimmunity, self-attack.
So just to clarify, you're talking about a food sensitivity test that tells you which foods that your body doesn't digest and doesn't process properly. And so then you eliminate those foods for a period of time. And
6 months to restore digestive competence, metabolic detoxification abilities. It includes good hydration, and you can do a self-test for hydration. It means improving your digestive competence and transit time. It means exactly what you said, eating the foods you can digest, assimilate, and eliminate without immune burden or distraction.
Okay, so now HSCRP is the next one. That's a marker of inflammation.
Right. Now, HSCRP is exactly right. It's a marker of inflammation. Less than 0.5 is the goal value, which means your innate immune system is able to repair you.
And 0.5 is kind of an extreme figure. A lot of labs say under 3 is normal. Most functional medicine practitioners say under 1 is the goal. Under 0.5 is really pushing
With respect, my friend, I've reviewed 300 scientific articles about HSCRP. I know who Ridker and Rafai are. He's the editor-in-chief of Clinical Chemistry. That's where you want to publish if you have something really worthwhile for clinical laboratorians like me. The literature is very clear. Healthy people all over the globe, at any age, of any ethnicity, healthy people, there are not many of them, but the healthy people have less than 0.5. And I'm glad to tell you that mine has been less than 0.5 for some time.
Mine too.
Great. Now, with respect, I understand statistics enough to know why some labs will say less than 3 is, quote, normal, statistically normal. I'm sorry, I don't take care of statistics. And I don't even anymore use statistics when there's one individual sitting in front of me, and I know the limitations of lab ranges. In fact, that individual may not be among the population where the range was standardized. And
great. So what's the best way to lower CRP?
Yes, best way to lower CRP is to have enough of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff. So you might start with the self-test that I mentioned, including the urine pH, and take enough magnesium and choline citrate, because only choline citrate uniquely enhances the uptake and chaperones the delivery of magnesium to the cell, correcting the metabolic acidosis and the metabolic syndrome, recharging the cell's ATP, protecting essential fats in transit, where magnesium functions as an antioxidant, and allowing the battery of the cell to recharge, and other things as well, including hundreds of enzyme catalysts that require magnesium to work. And if magnesium runs down, they're pro-enzymes, they're potential enzymes.
But if we take supplements of choline, won't we have elevated TMAO levels, which will increase our risk of heart disease?
No, I'm so glad you asked. If you had a long transit time, which you won't if you do the C-cleanse and have enough prebiotic and probiotic fiber and good bugs, if you have a long transit time and you have toxic metabolites of quaternary amines of all sorts in the colon, you too can produce TMAO, but I can tell you how to make it zero, how to make it go away. Have a transit time of 12 to 18 hours, do a C-cleanse once a week, and take 3/4 of that amount on a daily basis to cover antioxidant needs. Because as you know, and I think people will be interested in this, ascorbate is the maternal antioxidant that protects and regenerates all the others. So if you want glutathione, look at Alton Meister's work. The best way to raise glutathione is to have enough ascorbate, but it must be the fully reduced, fully buffered L-ascorbate. 90% of what is sold as vitamin C or ascorbic acid or ascorbate is synthetic. Half of it is D. If you take enough of it, it'll irritate the intestines because D-ascorbate isn't taken up. I really am a biochemist. And the point is that when you respect nature and therefore use the fully buffered, fully reduced L-ascorbate based on your individual oxidative burden or antioxidant need, you have, as you correctly said, lots of systemic benefits, and you now reduce the potential of the oxidation of the quaternary amine into the TMAO, so you can make the TMAO issue go away. And if anyone is interested, I think there's a YouTube video of me talking at length about the subject of why choline deficiency is a big problem in America. So get the choline, but it must be choline citrate, not choline bitartrate, for a lot of reasons. Get the choline as the citrate and have a healthy transit time so you don't have to be at all concerned about the TMAO. But I'm glad you asked about that because that is very, very important.
So how do we lower our homocysteine levels?
Right, thank you. Homocysteine should be less than 6. Now, very important that the plasma homocysteine be measured, not the serum, and very important that you process the specimen, and the labs will tell you this, within half an hour. Because once you draw the blood, homocysteine tends to leak out of cells into the plasma, giving an artifactual elevation. So follow the instructions, measure the plasma homocysteine. You want it to be 6, which is low. Most lab ranges go up above 10, which is well into the cardiovascular and stroke risk and heart attack risk and autoimmune risk zone.
A lot of labs say over 12 is abnormal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Pilber McCulley, the man who wrote the homocysteine miracle with his daughter, the man who put homocysteine on the map in the 1960s, what he pointed out is that really it's the ratio of methionine to homocysteine, and you want the methionine to be up and the homocysteine to be down. And why do you want that? Well, because this is what regulates methylation. Now, we're not going to get into the details, but trust me, methylation is very important, muy importante, in regard to translating the DNA through the RNA to the products, the proteins and the glycoproteins and the lipoproteins that need to get made. So very important. You want the methionine to be up. You want the homocysteine to be down. And there's lots of literature that less than 6 is clearly the healthy range for healthy people, again, all over the planet, every ethnic group, all-cause morbidity and mortality measure. Just get an accurate homocysteine. And
so we lower it by taking methyl B vitamins, B6, B12, folic acid, and...
Well, yes, we start with enough of super B complex and full mineral complex, such as the Perque Lifeguard capsule, to keep your urine sunshine yellow. So now you've got enough B complex. Then in order to get the homocysteine down, you want to have a lot of sulfur foods that are nature's detoxifying foods. This is GGOBE. That's the acronym for those who like little memory hooks. GGOBE stands for garlic, ginger, onions, brassica sprouts, that's broccoli sprouts. Now, all sprouts are good, but broccoli sprouts are particularly good. And eggs. And I can tell you in my home, we have goose eggs, we have duck eggs, we have quail eggs when they're available. We're skeptical of chicken eggs. If they're biodynamic chickens, if I know the chicken, then I would have a chicken egg. But I can tell you they've done terrible things to chickens and to chicken meat. and be careful, you know, the healthier the food, the healthier the fuel of your body, the more caring you are of your body, and therefore we can be even more friendly with each other, because this is information we had to uncover, recover, validate. It took years to find the 8 that cover all of epigenetics. And I'm glad to tell folks what the healthy people's value or range is. So now we've covered hemoglobin A1c, hsCRP, homocysteine, and LRA. Now let's move on to urine pH. 6.5 to 7.5 is the goal range. And you take 2 or more doses of Perque Mag Plus Guard and Percholine citrate, 2 capsules and a teaspoon. The teaspoon goes into the liquid or water of your choice. You can put vitamin C in there if you want. You can put most anything else in there if you want, because the choline citrate is going to marry up with the magnesium and form little inverted micellar nanodroplets. I really am a biochemist. And we have the global patents on enhanced uptake and chaperone delivery of magnesium to the cells that are hungry for it.
What about taking baking soda?
Right. Can we fool the body by taking baking soda? No. Anytime you try to fool the body, you'll end up fooling yourself. The body has a very elegant control of bicarbonate and CO2 called the Carbonic Anhydrase system. Those of you who are technical will have heard of it, but for everyone's knowledge, if you take bicarbonate by mouth, you reduce stomach acid, which impairs the uptake of minerals and B vitamins. You decrease the quality of digestion, because the stomach should be very acidic. It should have a pH very low, like 2 or below, so that the acid product of the stomach stimulates the bicarbonate and digestive enzymes from the pancreas. So there's lots of reasons why you don't want to swallow bicarbonate to try and alkalinize yourself. I know that people use it. There are trisalts out there. They're trying to use, instead of sodium bicarbonate, they use potassium and other salt bicarbonate. But bicarbonate, it impairs digestion and it doesn't do the job. You want minerals to alkalinize you. You want minerals to alkalinize you. You want short and medium chain fatty acids, like butyrates that you find in ghee, clarified butter, and other natural foods. And let's see, the third alkalinizing element, I should remember, and when I do, I'll bring it up. But anyway, you want to alkalinize, or, well, Sherry Rogers, a colleague, wrote a book called
Green Vegetables, right?
Yes, yes. Fruits and vegetables, whole foods, will alkalinize you. Then eat the foods that you can digest, assimilate, and eliminate without immune burden.
Okay,
so
I have to rush you along because we only got a few minutes here. So we got vitamin D, omega-3, and oxidative stress.
Yeah, let me combine them all, because what you're hearing and what our message, our takeaway message, our call to action message, if your body is efficient, everything locks together and it works really well. And now you're in the mode to thrive, not just survive. You want to be an elective protective, not survival. Now, the last 3 tests all have to do with either lipids, fat, and you want to increase the good fat. The deep water oily fish. Have fish, maybe the collar of the fish if you can get it, because that's really oily, but the eye of the fish should be clear when you get the fish. If it's been frozen and the eye is now cloudy, like it has a cataract, I'm not so sure that's still a healthy fish. And when we go to the market to buy a whole fish, to poach in our fish poacher in our nice little kitchen, there's only 1 or 2. And the people behind the counter know the never frozen, clear-eyed fish. So the last 3 tests have to do with optimizing your diet and attitude and lifestyle. And so we've talked about the eat and drink part. Be well hydrated. I do like wine. That's an option. Do not take a lot of juice, because the fiber goes away when you make the fruit juice, but have a lot of fruit, which has pectin and fiber. And now you get your 40 to 100 grams of fiber, 40 to 100 billion fermented organisms. How about live kimchi? You can get that in many ethnic markets. Any fermented food. How about a pickle? It's such a delicious dill pickle, but it's got to be a live pickle. If it's been pasteurized or Simonized, it's no longer a pickle. So the takeaway message is, have these 8 predictive biomarkers done through your office, or through Better Lab Tests Now, or through Perque Integrative Health, or ELISAAct.com, or drrusselljaffe.com. There are many ways of finding our work, and we're grateful for the opportunity to serve and especially to be with a colleague like you today. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Jaffe. And you've given us your contact information. And
if I could give a toll-free number, I'll do that too.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Just
Yep.
Please call now or soon. 1-800. You have two. 1-800-525-7372. 1-800-525-7372. Or 1-800-553-5472. 1-800-553-5472. And thank you. We are grateful for that.
Are those the numbers for your office or your lab or your?
That's for the lab. That's for the lab and for Perque Integrative Health. For full disclosure, I've had the privilege of teaching and doing research, but I do not have a private practice. We have a referral network of doctors who are certified in the WellGuard program through the Health Studies Collegium, and that keeps me off the streets and out of trouble.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor.